Hi, and welcome to Drupal Brief. This is an AI-generated brief of another video, podcast, or blog post. If you want to learn more about what's being discussed here, then please go check out the source. This podcast is produced by the team at Drupal Forge. We would love to create more AI-generated briefs like this. Please contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn and let him know what else you want us to cover. Oh, and if you have not tried Drupal Forge yet, you're missing out. You'll be able to do twice as much in half the time. So go check it out. Okay, that's it. Make sure to click subscribe. And here we go.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So you want to up your SEO game for 2024, huh? You send over this really interesting YouTube video with Ethan Smith breaking down Reforge's tactical roadmap for SEO in 2024. And honestly, he doesn't hold back about what actually moves the needle. Ready to jump in?
I am. It's refreshing how Ethan just cuts through all the SEO noise. He's making the case that only a tiny fraction of what we do, maybe like 5%, really makes a difference. He calls it the 5% rule, and it really got me thinking, does that apply to other parts of our lives too?
It definitely makes you think. But back to SEO, how do we figure out what actually falls into that 5%?
Well, Ethan's a big believer in data-driven decisions. He says just blindly following those so-called SEO best practices, it isn't enough. You have to analyze, you have to test things out, see what actually moves the needle for your website, and then ruthlessly prioritize those things.
That makes a lot of sense. So Ethan breaks SEO down into three main areas: technical, editorial, and programmatic SEO. And he starts by tackling technical SEO. He says that these huge technical audits, they're not really the key to success like a lot of people think. He says there are really only two technical elements that really matter.
This is where it gets interesting. He's arguing that internal linking and making absolutely sure that Google can read your pages, those are the two most important factors for technical SEO. He even showed this example of a massive technical audit, like this huge document, and almost all the recommendations in it were considered low impact. It really shows you how sometimes we overcomplicate SEO.
So break it down for me. Why are those two things so important?
Well, think of internal linking, like building a roadmap for Google. It helps Google understand how all your pages connect. So a solid internal linking structure makes it so much easier for Google to understand your website. Ethan suggests aiming for something like 5 to 10 internal links to every important page on your site. And, he actually recommends a tool called Screaming Frog. It helps you analyze the internal linking structure of your website. But it's not just about the number of links, right? The relevance of those links, where they're coming from, that matters too.
Okay, got it. So what about this whole issue of Google being able to read your pages? What's going on there?
Yeah, so this might surprise you, but pages that are built with JavaScript, they sometimes aren't fully indexed by Google. It can happen. And Ethan even showed an example of a big site like Masterclass running into this exact problem. And the fix is actually pretty straightforward. You have to make sure that your core content on those pages, it isn't completely reliant on JavaScript to load. And he suggested a really simple test. Just type site:/yourwebsite.com into Google, see what comes up, and then check if all the pages that you expect to see, if they're showing up in those search results.
That's a great tip. So simple, but so important. Before we move on to editorial SEO, any other things on the technical side that we should be thinking about?
Honestly, Ethan is really making the case that those two elements, internal linking and making sure Google can read your pages, those are the foundation of good technical SEO. You want to make sure your site is set up the right way before you even start thinking about content. It's kind of like building a house. You've got to have a solid foundation before you start decorating.
I love that analogy. Okay, let's move on to editorial SEO. Ethan calls this the most impactful long-term strategy, and he's suggesting a pretty big shift. He says we should move away from the traditional keyword-focused approach to SEO and start focusing on broader topics instead.
Yeah, that's a huge mindset shift, isn't it? He's basically saying stop chasing individual keywords and start thinking about those big picture themes that your audience actually cares about. And I really like this approach because it forces you to consider the user's intent, why they're searching for something in the first place. It makes you think bigger.
Can you give me an example of what that looks like?
Sure. Imagine someone searching for a 5-year plan. Now, they might just be looking for general information, but they could also need templates, examples, case studies. If you focus on that broader topic of strategic planning, you can create all sorts of content that covers all those different angles, and that positions you as an expert in their eyes, as someone who really understands their needs.
So it's about becoming like a one-stop shop for information on a topic, not just ranking for a bunch of individual keywords, right?
Exactly. And Google's getting really good at recognizing this. Ethan was talking about topical authority, which is basically how well-versed Google thinks your website is on a certain subject.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do you actually build this topical authority? Is it just a matter of creating more content?
It's more about creating the right kind of content. Ethan says a good place to start is by focusing on topics that are closely related to what you're already known for, and then you can gradually expand outward from there. He gave the example of Masterclass. Initially, they ranked really well for Beef Wellington because, they have Gordon Ramsay on their platform. But then they strategically built out all this content around different culinary themes, broader stuff, to really solidify their authority in the whole food and cooking space.
Ah, that's a great example. So it's not just about quantity, it's about creating a cohesive body of work that shows you really know your stuff on that particular topic. What else did Ethan recommend when it comes to editorial SEO?
Well, before you go creating a ton of new content, he suggests taking a look at what you already have. See if you can enhance those existing articles to cover a topic more comprehensively. Maybe you're ranking for certain keywords, but you're not really fulfilling the user's intent. He had this case study where they just added the word template to the title tags and the body of some existing articles and saw a huge jump in traffic.
So it's about finding those quick wins, making the most of what you already have. That's a great tip, especially for anyone feeling overwhelmed by the idea of creating tons of new content. Now, before we move on to programmatic SEO, I've got to ask about AI. It feels like everyone's buzzing about AI-generated content these days. Where does Ethan stand on that?
He's definitely aware of all the hype, but he's urging caution. He doesn't think you should rely solely on AI to create all your content. His take is that Google's getting better and better at detecting AI-generated content and penalizing the stuff that's just not original, that doesn't have that human touch. It might work for a little while, but it's not a winning long-term strategy.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Using AI for efficiency, but still maintaining that quality and originality that Google loves.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How do we leverage the power of AI without sacrificing that human element? It's a challenge we all have to figure out as AI keeps getting more sophisticated.
Absolutely. We'll have to explore that more in a future episode. But for now, let's dive into the world of programmatic SEO.
So programmatic SEO, it's all about creating pages on your site, but in a way that's more automated and scalable, like you're building systems to generate content, content that targets specific search queries and brings in consistent traffic.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm also a little confused. Can you maybe break that down a bit more?
Sure. Ethan really hammered this point. You need to make sure you're curating the pages on your site. Like every single page has to have a purpose. It has to be valuable. Because if you have all these low quality pages that don't get any traffic, that can actually hurt your website. Like Google sees that and thinks, this whole website might not be that great.
So it's not just about churning out as many pages as possible, right?
Yeah.
Quality over quantity.
Exactly. It's about being strategic. Choosing the right types of pages to create, pages that people actually need and are searching for. He even suggested taking a look at your site, like analyzing your existing pages. See if there are any that aren't getting any traffic, and then maybe you get rid of them, or maybe you combine them with other pages, make them stronger.
That makes sense, like decluttering your website.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the stuff that's not serving anyone. So what are some examples of programmatic pages that DO work well?
Ethan actually highlighted category pages as a huge opportunity. Most people just list their products or services on those pages. But what if you actually added valuable content there too? Stuff to help users understand and make decisions.
Okay, so like what? Give me an example.
Think buying guides, FAQs, comparison charts, even user reviews. The idea is to make those category pages into destinations, not just a list of products.
Ah, so they actually become resources, not just showcases.
Right. You want people to spend time there, learn something new, and ultimately feel confident making a purchase. He even said, check out your competitors. See what they're doing on their category pages. You might find some content gaps that you can fill.
That's a great tip. So we talked about internal linking earlier. How does that fit in with programmatic SEO? It seems like it could get messy if you're generating lots of pages automatically.
That's a great point. And Ethan actually suggested creating like an algorithm, something that automatically cross-links your category pages with other relevant content on your site. So you're still creating that web of interconnected pages that we talked about, but it's happening automatically.
Smart. It sounds like programmatic SEO is a bit more technical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other nuances we should be aware of on the technical side?
He did say to pay attention to your title tags on those programmatic pages. You can analyze your best performing category pages, see what keywords people are actually using to find them, and then make sure those words are in your title tags. It can make a big difference in your rankings.
Yeah, you shared that case study where just adding the word examples to the title tags of those category pages, that led to a 12% increase in traffic, right?
Exactly. Sometimes the smallest tweaks can really move the needle. But you have to be paying attention. You have to be analyzing.
So we've talked about cleaning up existing pages and making category pages more robust. Any other tips for coming up with ideas for new programmatic pages?
You know, he said competitive analysis is really key here. Dive deep into what your competitors are doing, see what types of pages they're ranking for that you're not, and that can spark some ideas.
So borrow inspiration from what's already working for others in your niche. But it's not about just copying them, right?
No, definitely not. Ethan was very clear about that. You have to provide something unique, something valuable. Think about what your brand does differently, how you can translate that into content that really helps your audience.
Makes sense. Okay, circling back to AI, it feels like this is where it could be really tempting to just use AI to generate all that content for programmatic SEO. What are Ethan's thoughts on that?
He actually shared an example of someone who did exactly that, used AI-generated content, and their traffic actually spiked initially, but then it tanked. He thinks Google is really cracking down on that, recognizing and even penalizing AI content that's not original. So it might work in the short term, but it's not a good long-term strategy.
So again, it's about balance, right? You can use AI to maybe help you brainstorm ideas or draft certain sections, but you still need that human touch. That's what Google seems to really value.
Totally. I think we're still figuring out what the role of AI is in SEO, but I think Ethan's right that human element is crucial if you want to create content that really connects with people.
It sounds like Ethan's overall message is to be strategic and thoughtful with programmatic SEO. Don't just chase traffic. Focus on what users need and what Google wants to see. Now, before we move on, Ethan also mentioned something called the SEO journey. What's that all about?
It's a good reminder that SEO is a long game. You don't see results overnight. And it's important to manage expectations, especially when you're working with stakeholders, clients, whoever who might be, expecting to see results immediately.
So how do we effectively communicate this journey to those stakeholders? How do we keep them on board?
Honesty and transparency. Ethan said you've got to set realistic goals. You have to explain the steps involved. And then you have to regularly communicate your progress, even if it's slow going, even if you're not seeing those big wins yet.
So it's about building trust and making sure everyone understands that SEO is a process. It takes time and it takes consistent effort. Now, I want to shift gears back to editorial SEO for a minute. Ethan mentioned that editorial content often has low conversion rates. Why is that?
He thinks it's because a lot of SEOs aren't really focused on conversion optimization. They're so focused on getting traffic to those blog posts and articles, but they're not thinking about how to actually convert those visitors into leads or customers.
Right, because you can have the most beautiful storefront in the world, but if nobody's buying anything, what's the point?
Exactly. He actually said we need to start thinking about conversions from the very beginning when we're creating editorial content. He even suggested a whole separate course just on conversion rate optimization, so he's serious about this.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on topical authority one more time. It seems to be a really important theme in Ethan's approach to SEO. Can you remind me why it's so crucial?
Imagine becoming the go-to expert on a specific topic. The more high-quality content you create around that topic, the more Google sees you as an authority, the better your chances are of ranking for all the searches related to that topic.
So it's all about building that reputation and credibility in Google's eyes. So how do we do that? How do we establish and grow that topical authority?
Obviously, content is a big part of it. We've talked about creating comprehensive content that covers all those different facets of a topic, but it's also about getting other websites to link back to you, to vouch for you.
So backlinks are still important.
Oh, absolutely. But it's not just about quantity anymore. It's about quality and relevance. He said to focus on earning links from websites that are already considered authorities in your niche. And when you do that, use anchor text that strengthens your topical authority. Like if you're trying to build authority around sustainable fashion, you want to earn links from websites that are already known for that.
Right. It's like getting endorsements from the experts. So before we move on to our final thoughts, anything else we should keep in mind when it comes to building topical authority?
Yeah, he emphasized the importance of being patient. It takes time to build real topical authority. It's not going to happen overnight.
So another reminder that SEO is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to put in the work consistently, and you'll get there eventually. This deep dive into Ethan Smith's SEO strategies has been really eye-opening. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
I know, right? He really has a knack for making even the most complex SEO stuff seem approachable. And he gives you those actionable steps that you can actually implement, which is huge.
Yeah, and he kept coming back to that idea of focusing on those high-impact actions, that 5% that really moves the needle.
Exactly. Prioritizing internal linking, making sure Google can actually crawl your site, targeting topics instead of just keywords, enhancing your existing content, really thinking strategically about your programmatic SEO, and of course being thoughtful about how you use AI. It's a lot to take in, but it's all really valuable stuff.
It feels like his whole approach to SEO is about finding that sweet spot between like data-driven strategy and human creativity.
Totally. It's not about trying to game the system or anything like that. It's about understanding what users actually want and creating content that's genuinely helpful and valuable. And if you do that, Google will reward you for it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. How can you apply Ethan's 5% rule beyond SEO? Like, what are those key actions in other areas of your life or business that really drive the majority of your results?
Ooh, that's a good one. It might be the relationships you cultivate. Or maybe it's the specific skills you hone in on, or the processes you refine to make things more efficient. It's really about identifying those leverage points, those things that have an outsized impact.
I love that. Take some time to think about what really moves the needle for you and how you can double down on those efforts.
Because at the end of the day, success isn't about doing everything. It's about doing the right things really, really well.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I hope this deep dive has given everyone listening a fresh perspective on SEO and maybe even inspired you to try some new things.
Yeah, don't be afraid to experiment, to push the boundaries a bit. That's how you find what works best for you.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.
All right. What did you think? Did the AI-generated thing work for you? Let us know. Anyway, to close off this podcast, I just wanted to remind you that this brief was a fully AI-generated summary, and we take no credit for the original content. If you want more AI-generated summaries like this, then let us know. Contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn. By the way, we're automating the entire process from start to finish, so these briefs can be generated hands-free and on schedule. You want something else covered? We're happy to do it for you. This brief was brought to you by Drupal Forge. Drupal Forge is the new #1 platform to try, demo, and develop Drupal sites, and it is completely free to use. It is a community-supported nonprofit platform run by volunteers, just like yourself. Come join us.